This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hindu's In Focus podcast. I'm Zubeda Hamid, your host for today. Here are some significant numbers. India's total fertility rate has dipped. It has gone down from 2.0 and now stands at 1.9 as of 2023. Another significant number is that for the first time, the total fertility rate in rural India has reached replacement levels. Replacement level is the average number of children each woman needs to give birth to for one generation to replace another. There are, of course, wide regional disparities. Some states in the country have fertility rates much below replacement levels of 2.1, while others continue to have higher numbers. These numbers are from the Sample Registration Survey's statistical report that was released last week. The report also found that India's crude birth rate is declining, while at the same time there is an increase in the number of people aged over 60. How is the dipping fertility rate going to impact India's population going forward? Will some states continue to grow population-wise while others see a steep fall? What does this mean for population stabilization and decline in the future? And how fast is our country aging? We discuss these questions and more with Sonal Desai, Professor at the National Council of Applied Economic Research and Distinguished University Professor at the University of Maryland, United States. Hello and welcome to the Hindu's In Focus podcast, Professor Sonal Desai.
Thank you for inviting me.
Professor, we are discussing the Sample Registration Survey's data for 2023 this time. And one of the things that it showed was that India's total fertility rate now stands at 1.9, a slight dip from the 2.0 in 2021 and 2022. Does this indicate a stabilization of our population in the coming years? And does it also indicate perhaps a decline?
So it does not indicate a stabilization or decline in immediate future. While two parents are reproducing themselves slightly below their own reproduction level, there are so many young parents that the population will continue to grow for another 25 years or so, based on what is often known as population momentum, which means there are many more younger people than older people, and hence there will be many more children. Ultimately, however, it would indicate a population stabilization should we stay at this particular total fertility rate.
But for the next 25 years or so, there is going to be a growth and then ultimately stabilization, and then post that perhaps a decline if the levels continue, correct?
If we continue to drop, as long as it stays close to 1.9, 2.0, we will still see stable population. However, if it starts dropping significantly below it, for example, going down to TFR of 1.7 or 1.5, yes, we would see a decrease in population in the very long run.
What is the data telling us so far? Are we heading towards that path? Are the fertility rates continuing to dip slightly year on year?
They are certainly continuing to dip slightly year on year. A little bit of that decline is also associated with postponement of marriage. So what happens is that the women who used to get married at age 18 and 19 are now getting married at age 20 and 21, which sort of delays the fertility a little bit. But on the whole, yes, I believe that fertility is on a downward trend in India.
Professor, talk to us a little bit about the rural fertility rate. So the data also shows that for the first time in rural India, the total fertility rate has reached replacement levels. Could you talk to us about this a little bit?
Historically, urban fertility rate was lower than rural fertility rate, largely because education was low in rural areas and farms could absorb new workers. And so people did not see nearly as big a need to curtail their fertility. But increasingly, what we are seeing is that education is increasing in rural areas, aspirations are increasing in rural areas, and most importantly, infant mortality rate has also gone down in both rural and urban India, which means that parents no longer need to have extra children as an insurance. historically, parents were sort of hesitant to stop at 2 children, thinking, well, I do want to have 2 children, but who knows? What if one of my children did not survive into older age? And that would lead them to have a slightly higher than desired fertility as a way of insurance. Again, this is something that most people don't see as being necessary anymore. So there are a lot of social transformations happening in rural India, declining fertility, increasing education, increasing aspirations, which are all resulting in a low fertility rate in rural India.
You also pointed out that with increasing education, women are marrying slightly later. Is that a phenomenon that is happening in rural India as well?
Yes, it is. The child marriage has declined significantly, and school enrollment for girls in secondary schools are increasing even in rural India.
Doctor, talk to us a little bit about the disparity in the total fertility rate. We know that the total fertility rate for India is dipping, but we know that also that there is a wide regional differences. Bihar, for instance, stands at 2.8. Tamil Nadu, for instance, is at 1.3. How is this going to play out demographically, and is there a chance that this will even out at some point?
Interesting question. To begin with, I think that we have to acknowledge that fertility is dropping everywhere, whether it is Tamil Nadu or Bihar. Usually we used to say that, Bimaru states, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan had much higher fertility than the rest of India. But even they are experiencing change. Bihar's 2.8 is a significant downward trend from Bihar's 3.2. So the northern India began its fertility transition later than southern India, but they are moving in the same directions. So ultimately, I think we'll all have all the states sort of converging on similar fertility over time. It will take some time, and until then, it would feel like there is an imbalance across the states, with southern states seeing much lower population growth rate than the northern states. But over time, I suspect we will all end up at a similar level. Now, the question that really comes is whether 1.3 is the normal state of affairs for India to look at in future, or is this sort of more of a temporary phenomenon? And I would like to suggest that it's more of a temporary phenomenon. I think what is happening in India is that, unlike Western Europe, where fertility has gone down significantly, or even countries like Korea or Singapore, India fertility decline is not an aversion towards family, but rather a sort of increased value of the family and greater desire to invest in one's children. So we don't see people who don't get married and never have a children. What we do see is people having a child, but maybe stopping at one child instead of 2 or 3. So family values remain strong, and certainly we expect that most people will end up with at least one child, and possibly over time, they may move towards sort of, some people having 2, some people having 1, averaging out around 1.5, 1.6, which would be a pretty good level for us to get to.
How do the economics play out in this? When do you start to have fewer children, and then do you reach a point where you have enough resources and enough financial wealth in order to be able to have more children?
That's a very interesting question. Basically, I think that the high fertility, which was, 3, 4, 5 children that we used to see, was in an era where children were economically resourced at pretty young ages. They got engaged helping their parents on family farms, taking care of livestock, helping out in family business. And that allowed families to have larger number of children, and sometimes made it desirable to have larger families. Over time, I think that our economics is changing. Farm sizes are getting smaller, being able to absorb fewer people. And one would hope that over time, a formal sector salaried jobs would be increasing, which would require not more children, but more children with but more like children with higher skills and higher levels of education, which basically then means that people start having fewer children. Now, the question is, at what point is it too few? And I think that is actually the question that the society needs to think about, because what we have seen is that countries where there is a greater access to childcare, greater child support, better education systems where parents need to spend less money to have educate their children are the countries where families are able to afford two children. And their TFR tends to be in the range of 1.6 to 1.8 rather than going to the extreme lows of Korea, which is below 1. And I think India will have to start thinking about some of these issues more concretely as the years go by.
I'm guessing the South Indian states will have to consider these things first, correct?
Absolutely. And I think actually they are very well poised to do so, right? So one of the things that some of the South Indian states, particularly states like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, etc., have done is they have taken advantage of declining fertility and growing economic opportunity to enhance their manufacturing base, their service sector base, and creating more jobs, which means that the incomes in the states are higher than in some of the other states, allowing them to have greater investments, both government and private, into the factors that lead to better harmonization of families with long-term economic outcome for both families in the state.
Professor, talk to us a little bit about the graying population. The SRS data also indicates that in states such as Kerala, the population above 60 is as high as 15%. But again, in a state like such as Jharkhand, it stands at 7.6%. Do we have a simultaneously young and old population?
We have young population in some states and graying population in other states. This is something that we would really have to think about as we see the future. Now, one of the challenges of graying population is really A, how to economically support them, and B, how to ensure that they live healthy and productive lives. So I think that the states which are beginning to see graying population really need to invest in both ensuring that there are economic opportunities. See, historically, India has been one of those countries where we have had very low retirement age. There have been companies which had a retirement age as low as 58, which has now slowly been creeping up. So creating economic opportunities for people who are young elderly, somewhere between 55 and 65 or even 70 would be something that we'll have to think about. The second thing we'll have to think about is how to ensure that they remain healthy, both improving their quality of life and ability to take care of themselves, as well as reducing burden on the state for healthcare provision. And again, this is something where we have to start focusing on people in their middle ages. For example, ensuring that the burden of non-communicable diseases remains manageable, screening for diabetes, for hypertension, improving healthy lifestyles, where needed, medical management of some of these diseases. Those are the areas we'll have to start thinking about more. And again, I think that the southern states are on the forefront of thinking of some of this. They were on the forefront of thinking about how to reduce infant mortality. And now it's time to think about how to improve health of the middle-aged and older population.
Circling back to declining fertility levels and the regional disparities, Professor, the last time we done a podcast, you'd spoken about the need for the southern states to perhaps welcome more people from other parts of the country. How well is India doing in this front? From the little that we know about the migration patterns and how it works, do people really come and settle down for life in southern states, or is there always a connect back home that they desire to go back to?
All Indians retain a connect with the places from which they originated. We certainly have greater connections with our parents, with other kin and social networks. So I suspect that regardless of whether it is migrants from Kerala into Middle East or migrants from Bihar into Kerala, there will always be a certain amount of connect with their home communities. The question is, does it prevent them from settling and integrating into their destination communities? And some of it very much depends on the conditions under which this migration takes place. Historically, UP and Bihar, some of the big migrant-standing states, have done this for generations, but it has often been solo male migration. So as long as the migrants leave their wives, their children and families behind, it would be hard for them to settle into their communities into which they migrate. So I think what we might need to think about is how to create migration conditions which are welcoming to the families as a whole rather than solo male migrants. And this is going to be a major challenge for us to think about. My guess is that in areas where migration consists of educated migrants, this would be a lot easier to handle than where migrants are sort of more manual laborers. And there the state will have to take a particularly important role in ensuring that there is a greater provision of housing that allows the whole family to migrate rather than men migrating and living in communal housing.
So we still haven't reached that point where we are welcoming or allowing or creating conditions for full integration to take place, correct?
No, we have not. And this is particularly true when you sort of start seeing a lot of regional and linguistic chauvinism, which sort of there is this sense of, Mumbai is for Mumbaikars. Well, that makes it difficult for people to migrate and be fully integrated. So I think we may need to change our mindset. And my guess is that graying states will be more likely to be changing their mindsets more easily than states which have a lot of surplus labor.
Of course, all of this also boils down a lot to politics, which we discussed in our previous podcast. But again, circling back, Professor, one of the things that was recently revealed even by the WHO and by other international organizations is that more than the problem of declining fertility, it is about perhaps not being able to have the number of kids that you desire at the time that you desire. Would you say that this problem exists in India as well?
It does. And there are two aspects of it. One is infertility. When people marry later and over time, the fecundity goes down, creating more of an infertility. And this is something we have never sort of treated. We have been so preoccupied with reducing fertility that we have not paid enough attention to people who have difficulty conceiving or carrying a child to term. So that requires attention. But equivalently, I think our challenge also is that almost all of our contraception services are geared around sterilization. And that doesn't allow for enough space for people to think about planning out spacing between the children. So it is generally assumed that, you have one child and then you have a second child and then you think about sterilization, rather than ensuring that there is sufficient contraceptive available to newly married couples to postpone their first birth, for mothers with one child to postpone their second birth, which will require a focus on what is called temporary methods or spacing methods of family planning. And this is something that we haven't paid a whole lot of attention to.
Last question, Professor. What can we learn from declining fertility levels elsewhere? You spoke about Korea, Japan, Western Europe. You said something about how creating child-friendly systems and parent-friendly systems could help maintain fertility levels on an even keel. Where are the good lessons? What direction do we need to head into?
So, for example, if we think in terms of Scandinavia, their maternity and paternity leave policies have been very helpful in terms of making it easier for families to combine work and child rearing, which has sort of created a greater likelihood that the fertility doesn't go down to the lowest low levels as we see. The second part of it is creating your housing and zoning conditions where work is closer to home. If like in Mumbai, if you have to commute roughly about 3 hours a day, 1.5 hour one way and 1.5 hour the other way, it makes it very difficult to both maintain work and raise children. So sort of creating child-friendly policies, housing, cities, zoning would remain important. The other lesson that we can also take away is somewhat of a negative lesson from countries like Korea, where education has become so competitive that there is a tremendous demand on parents' time to ensure that their children get the best education, participating in their schoolwork and so on. And we see sometimes that in some of the upper class Indian families as well, There are offices where it's very hard to find women workers during the exam months because they're at home sort of supervising their children. I think creating educational systems which are welcoming, friendly, and do not rely on parents to sort of educate their children would be something it would be helpful for us to think about.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.